had a request from someone who wanted to see if there was a way they could simulate or make something would look like one of those chenille school letters you get when you are on the track team or the football team or the choir or whatever it might be. So we're going to do that. First of all, if you're going to do this, you really need to find a font that's very collegiate looking, and Impact is not one of them. I've actually found an ideal font for this purpose. It actually is called Freshman, and as you'll see, it looks just like those nice collegiate letters, those chenille letters. I found this on a website called Dafont, like as if, where's Dafont? DAFONT.com. Now, if you're English speaking, you want to put /en on it or click, because otherwise it'll start in French and you'll have to switch to English. But there's a bunch of really nice shareware and freeware fonts there. So we're just going to take this and make it very, very large. Now, needless to say, this technique will work with any letter, any font really, but we're going to actually I just decided to make it an A instead. So basically, you have to decide now the color scheme you're going to use. Now, just for the purpose so you can see what's happening, I'm going to take my background color and just change it to a different color, just so we have a bit of contrast here. Now, again, this is not part of the design, but I want you to be able to see what's going on, because if you look at chenille letters, they usually have either a white or a very pale color on the outside. It's kind of the felt area. So I'm going to just change our overall A to that look. Now we're going to make a new layer and Command or Control click on the A to load it as a selection. Then we will go under Select, Modify, Contract. And this is where you have to experiment. I'm going to contract by 6 pixels because I want to make sure there's some of the white around the outside. And now we're going to choose our color scheme. We're going to make this school color it's going to be green on the outside, because it's green and gold are this fictitious school's colors. So I just fill that. Then once again, modify, contract, once again by 6, make a new layer, and then on this one we're going to choose the actual color of the chenille part, the kind of fuzzy, what that part I'm talking about. So we're going to use kind of a goldy color, something like that. And again, fill that, and now we can deselect. So that's the basic idea, but it's not looking very school letter-ish at this point. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to our green, the second color, because that's the part that usually has a bit of an edge to it. So we're going to add a bevel and emboss. I'm going to try to make sure this bevel and emboss amount is fairly small. So we're going to use a regular inner bevel, but take this size and make it really quite small. So it's just very, very subtle, so it looks like there's a bit of an edge, even 1 perhaps. And maybe we'll just soften that up just a tad. Because we just want it to be a very subtle look, like there's some height to it. Then we're going to take our top layer, which is our chenille part, and we're going to use Filter, Texturizer, which will, of course, open an enormous dialog box, much bigger than we could ever think necessary. And basically, this is where you have to experiment. I found that either canvas or actually sandstone is the one I want to use. And usually it comes in looking something like this, very subtle. We want to look much more like chenille, so the way we do that is push the relief up fairly high. You can experiment with the scaling if you really want to make it big or smaller. I find somewhere in this sort of range. And again, you can experiment a little bit. But look at that, just by doing that little things now, this looks much more like one of those school letters. So at this point, if I link these 3 layers together, I can, of course, do things like free transform, do whatever I want. Now we're going to do one last thing. This is sort of an optional step, but if you really want to create the illusion, you can do this. We're going to Command or Control click on the very outside one, make a new layer, and we're going to contract that by just a few pixels. So it brings it just in slightly. As where it gets a little tricky, we're going to go into the Paths menu and choose Make Work Path. And that's going to turn this, the selection into a path. Okay, so now we'll come back to our layers palette, make sure we're still on the same layer. Now here's the part that gets a little bit odd at first, but basically we're going to do this. We're going to take our brush tool, We're going to use one of our little small brushes, like maybe a 3-pixel brush. But we need to look at our big brushes palette that has some of the other options, including spacing. So if we increase the spacing, you see now I start to get space between the brush. Okay, so do that. Now we're on the layer. Remember, we still have a path. So we go back to the paths palette, and at the bottom of the paths palette, this second button is the stroke path button. If I hold down, oops, hold on one second. First thing first, make sure I have kind of a gray color. So we're on our brush. We've already chosen the brush. We want this opacity all the way up. Okay, so now we're in our paths palette. Hold down Option Alt and click on the stroke path button. It'll ask you, what do you want to stroke it with? And I'm going to say I want to stroke it with my brush tool. Now it's going to be the brush tool using that brush I previously created. So when I click OK, it will go around paint. If I hide the path, you see it just adds little tiny dots around the outside. Now if we do this correctly and play with opacity, you can just very subtle make it look like there's just a little bit of that kind of stitching around the outside that would be necessary if we were going to really stitch it onto something. So again, now we would go through and name all these layers. The only thing about the way this is done is, of course, if you want to change it to a letter T, all these other layers have to start over again. So in part 2 of this movie, we'll see how we can automate this by creating an action to do all these things. But again, you can get the idea, and we'll just take this A in a moment and put it on a different background. So here's our finished product. We just linked the layers, dragged them into another photo, added some type, and we've got a nice looking school letter that we can easily use in any way we want.
Wait just a moment. That's all there is to it.